I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and the great news about the Hyundai Ioniq 6 electric sedan is that, at least here in Australia, you don't need anything more than the base model, and that's what I'm reviewing today. This is the Ioniq 6 Dynamiq rear-wheel drive. It costs $74,000 before on-road costs out here in Australia, and the way that Hyundai have specified it is to have almost everything you need. Of course, you can go further up the range, you can get all-wheel drive models with all sorts of tech, digital mirrors and all that jazz, but for most buyers, for most drivers here on the Australian continent, the rear-wheel drive Dynamiq model is just beautifully spec'd. And in this video, I'm going to take you through why I feel that way. We'll check out the interior of this car, the back seat and the boot. We'll discuss the running costs. I'll take you through our highway range and recharging test, which this car did extremely well on thanks to its efficiency and fast charging platform. And then we'll go for a drive in the Ioniq 6 to see why it's so well suited to the kinds of roads we have here in Australia, including at our private test track. But before we get started, hit subscribe down below, hit the notification bell, and you won't miss any of our independent reviews. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. So inside the Ioniq 6 Dynamiq rear-wheel drive model might be the cheapest of the range, but it feels far from cheap in the cabin. Instead, we've just got a pleasant interior from the layout to the material selection, and this is one way that I think Hyundai does a better job with the eGMP platform than Kia. Now, we like the EV6, we especially like the EV6 GT, but the interiors just feel a bit cheap for the expensive prices that these EVs tend to command. Now, the Ioniq 6 is not exactly an affordable car. This is $74,000 plus on-road costs, but the interior feels almost up to that price, in my opinion, which is not that easy for an EV. It starts with standard leather seats. Now, of course, not everybody wants animal-related leather, I completely understand that, but it's still a material that's regarded by most as premium, and it feels premium here. It's perforated white leather in this car, which looks absolutely fantastic. You can get darker interiors on some colors as well. The seats have 10-way adjustment as standard here in the front, plus seat heating. However, you'll need to step up to the mid-spec Technic all-wheel drive model if you want Hyundai's relaxation seats, which tilt all the way back for a bit of a nap while you charge the car. And you also get cooled seats and a sunroof on the Technic, neither of which you get here on the Dynamiq. But I think I could live without it because this spec is a lot cheaper than the mid-spec Ioniq 6. I also love that you get the Bose premium audio as standard on this car, and the stereo actually sounds really convincing, partially because we've got acoustic glass front and down the side, so the cabin is really soft and quiet, which means you enjoy your music quite a lot more. In terms of the technology, we've got two 12.3-inch screens here. We've got this big binnacle. There's quite a large gap between the screens, so it's not really doing that kind of attempt to look like one display, but they work fine. Hyundai's own system is reasonably easy to use. You have wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Hyundai just won't lay down its arms with one of the smartphone manufacturers, so for whatever reason it doesn't have wireless CarPlay and Android Auto, which would be nicer at this price. Looking forward, we've got a digital instrument cluster of sorts. It needs more customization. You can put a few different screens on there, trip information, your next nav direction, but not a lot more than that. But it does display the blind spot cameras, which are a fantastic technology, and it makes it really easy to see what's running down the side of the car. That being said, the Dynamiq and the Technic, they both have normal side mirrors. If you go for the top of the range Epic model, you get camera mirrors, which sit sort of here, they're displays. That's why we don't have anything sitting here on this lower grade model. In terms of materials, pretty nice. Leather steering wheel, not like the plastic thing you get in some EVs on this platform. Squidgy materials up here. Hard doors unusually, but you do get a soft pad to rest your arm on here and in the center, and this amazing center console with loads of storage and all these parametric details around the cabin. It feels forward thinking. It also feels a little retro, a little 70s, 80s in here. To be honest, I like it. It suits me. Let's check out the back. If the Ioniq 6 was to have an Achilles heel, it's probably rear headroom. Now, I'm 6 foot, and if I sit here, I can just feel the top of my relatively short hair touching the headliner. So if you've got big hair, or you're a bigger person than I am, then you're gonna find that it's a little tight in the back here. It's not a problem in the Ioniq 5, this car's sibling model, which is more of a sort of mid-size SUV, big hatchback kind of shape. This is a sedan, so people that buy sedans these days don't really put people in the back all that often, but if it's a consideration for you, you've got tall teenagers, tall colleagues, tall mothers-in-law, then you're going to need to probably choose something else. But the rest of the dimensions here are great. I mean, look at this. We've got a huge wheelbase in this car. That means that legroom is just comical. There's so much of it. Tow room, it's a little tight with the driver's seat on the floor, but it's not too bad. I've still got plenty of room. The seat base is just inclined enough to support my legs. I think it could be a little better, but it's still better than like a Tesla Model 3 or a Polestar 2 in that regard. We've got air vents, USB ports, bit of storage. Those hard materials on the doors continue, but as does the plush insert, so that's okay. Flip down armrest, nice big solid item. You know, I could do a few hours back here. I probably just slouch a little bit, and then I definitely can't touch the roof, but you know, just something to be aware of. One interesting thing Hyundai could do to fix that is I think they should turn the Ioniq 6 into having a station wagon model as well, which would be popular in Europe and would probably let them continue the roofline a little bit higher, so you'd have more headroom and of course a bigger boot. And speaking of the boot, that's what we're going to have a look at now. Well, I think you'd certainly call the rear end of the Ioniq 6 striking. I think in the past I've also described it as challenging. At first, I really wasn't a fan. It feels like an AU Falcon and Porsche 993 mashup in a lot of ways, but you know what? Like a lot of challenging things, for some reason, it's growing on me. And of course, you can let me know down below in the comments how you feel about the rear end design of this car. But one awesome thing is that Hyundai is just nailing lighting. For a long time, Audi has been sort of the de facto lighting leader in the car industry. I think Hyundai is giving them a big run for their money, and this parametric pixel design, which features in so many places around the Ioniq 6, is just absolutely stunning. Now, I mentioned before that I thought a wagon would be a great addition to the range. Part of the reason is because while this sedan has a decently deep boot, the amount of space on offer is actually quite minimal, so pretty small for a sedan. Underneath that boot floor, you find a little bit of extra storage space, but no spare wheel of any kind on this car, which is a bit of a frustration. You could do something like carry it on the roof if you really wanted to, or strap it down here in the boot. There are options if you want to do serious long distance touring, but would have loved to have seen this car having a spare. Now you can fold down the rear seats using these tabs right here in the boot, which is a really nice feature. In terms of other stuff, not a lot to write home about, but we do have buttons up here for the power tailgate, which is standard on all Ioniq 6 models. Now, unlike a lot of EVs, the Ioniq 6 does have a frunk or a front boot. Opening up the bonnet here reveals a relatively small space, but it's a lot bigger on the rear wheel drive than on the dual motor all-wheel drive. Now, this is going to let you get a small bag or a backpack in there. This particular car has the granny charger put in this area. Now, it's not quite as neat as some EVs. We've obviously got access here to a whole bunch of fluids, the battery, etc. So easier to maintain that stuff, but a little bit messier when you open up the bonnet in order to get to the front. So there we go. Different people will have different priorities. When it comes to running costs, it of course starts with charging, and to completely replenish the 74 kilowatt hour usable battery, it's going to cost you about 18 bucks at home, which when you remember that the urban range of the car as tested is over 600 kilometers, that is a very, very cheap tank of petrol if you were comparing the Ioniq 6 to something like a BMW 3 Series, Mercedes C-Class, etc. In terms of using public charges, as you're more likely to do on a highway road trip at 60 cents per kilowatt hour or thereabouts, it's going to cost you in the vicinity of about $35 to recharge this car, which is still competitive against combustion vehicles. In terms of servicing, you only have to do it every 2 years or 30,000 kilometers, and the first 2 visits cost $560 each. Meanwhile, the warranty on most of the vehicle components is 5 years with unlimited kilometers. The high voltage bits and bobs have their own 8-year, 160,000 kilometer warranty. Now, like all EVs that we test, we put the Ioniq 6 through the Chasing Cars highway range and recharging test. We use a realistic 200 kilometer loop of highway outside of Sydney to gauge exactly how far an EV will be able to travel at highway road trip speeds. We then use that data to conduct a highway recharging test from 50 to 350 kilometers of range, replicating about the kind of top up that you'd want to make on a road trip here in Australia. And well, the Ioniq 6 rear wheel drive has aced that test, partially because it's got a decently big 74 kilowatt hour usable battery, which in fact is the accurate usable size, not 77.4 as some people have said. But it also has an 800 volt platform, which allows very rapid charging. But first, to range. On the highway, we were able to get efficiency of 15.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which was good enough for a highway range of 477 Ks. Would have been lovely to see it break that 500 kilometer number, but 477 ain't bad. More impressive though is the highway recharging time, because we timed it from 50 to 350 Ks of range in just 15 minutes and 14 seconds, the quickest we have ever seen from any EV on that test, with a peak of 239 kilowatts, which is pretty quick, but it's actually the charging curve which is most impressive for this car. But when it comes to urban, well, that's where the Ioniq 6 just does tremendously well. We recorded urban efficiency of 11.9 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks, which is good enough for an urban range of 621 kilometers. Incredibly useful if you spend most of your time driving in town. So pulling away in the most inexpensive, technically lowest power version of the Ioniq 6, at least out of those that come to Australia, what's the impression? Well, the impression is that this is absolutely enough for almost anybody. Of course, you know, if you want maximum power or if you have a need for all-wheel drive traction, you know, in your day-to-day lifestyle, then the Technic all-wheel drive and Epic all-wheel drive variants might suit you better. But I think for most people here in Australia, the Dynamiq rear-wheel drive is not only a good way to save money and to be more efficient, but it's just really pleasant to drive, partially because it is the two-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive model, with the front wheels allowed to do the turning and the rear wheels allowed to do the driving. There's a reason why rear-wheel drive is regarded as the classic sports car configuration. It's just the best in terms of driving feel and engagement. So what are we dealing with here? Well, we have a single motor mounted on the rear axle. It produces 168 kilowatts of power and 350 Newton meters of torque. So it's right in line with sort of classic V6 engines, and in a lot of ways that's kind of how it feels in terms of performance, but with the addition of massive torque available at 0 RPM, which is, you know, a hallmark of electric powertrains. Now, the Ioniq 6 rear-wheel drive, it doesn't, you know, chuck you into the back of the seat at light speed like some other EVs tend to do. It's a little bit more measured, but the performance testing figures don't lie. Even though Hyundai claims that you'll only be able to do 7.4 seconds 0 to 100 runs in this car, we were able to do much better than that. Our numbers were about 6.5, so Hyundai is dramatically understating the level of performance available in this car. It's hot hatch quick, even in just standard rear-wheel drive form. But of course, if you go for the all drive, the 239 kilowatt, you'll shave almost another 2 seconds off the 0 to 100 time. They are properly quick, but not many people really need that. What about in the other direction? Well, the brakes are pretty strong. The Ioniq 6 rear-wheel drive delivered us about a 35-meter stop from 100 to 0, which is good enough for this segment without being an absolute standout. But the rest of the driving experience is really what makes this a great EV and just a really nice premium sedan, no matter what kind of fuel it has. It's got a lovely, even, supple ride that is well suited to Australian roads. Now, like the Kia EV6, the Ioniq 6 has Hyundai and Kia's frequency selective dampers. Now, they're not adaptive in the sense that you choose a sport mode or a comfort mode here in the cabin. Instead, they respond to what's actually happening underneath the car in real time, and they're trying to just provide a ride which is both controlled and compliant, and the Ioniq 6 absolutely succeeds in doing that, both in town and in the country here in Australia. And there's no better Ioniq 6 for ride quality than the Dynamiq, which has these aero wheels. They're only 18 inches. They're, you know, they don't look that small to me, but because you're able to get that chunkier tire, you're also getting more passive insulation from bumps from the rubber of the tire. If you step up to either of the all-wheel drive grades here in Australia, you're having to take a 20-inch alloy wheel, Pirelli P0 tires, which have more grip, but they're nowhere near as good in terms of efficiency. And that's something that the Ioniq 6 rear-wheel drive just gets so right, especially in town. I mean, sub 12 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks in terms of efficiency is amazing, giving you over 600 kilometers per charge if you drive mainly in town. And if you drive mainly on the highway, this is really still a great partner in terms of road tripping, as we talked about before. Now, all models have acoustic glass at the front and down the sides, so this is a really uncannily quiet car at times, which lets you enjoy the Bose stereo, which is also standard. And in fact, you're just not wanting for much equipment here on the rear drive, and given that it drives so sweetly, it rides the best out of any Ioniq 6. It's got reasonably fun, kind of sporty handling, plenty of traction, plenty of grip, and it's just easy to drive quickly down a country road. You're just left with the conclusion that you probably don't really need to spend more than $74,000 plus on-road costs, which is the going fee for this car, and that's before you consider all of the benefits like the 800-volt platform, the ultra rapid charging, the amazingly quick highway recharging times that we've been able to test. Very, very pleasant EV. However, there is one big nitpick that I have to make with it, and that's that the Ioniq 6 has the same speed limit warning system as other new Hyundai and Kia and Genesis vehicles, and that's that the car will just constantly bing and bong at you if you've gone over what it's decided the speed limit is. And sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong, sometimes it misreads speed signs, or you pick up a 10-kilometer speed sign off at the side of the road somewhere, but you as a human, it doesn't actually apply to what you're doing, and the car is getting very upset about that. And every time you have to start the car, you've got to go in and turn that system off. Other recent releases which are trying to comply with the same European laws on speed limit warning systems are nowhere near this intrusive. So I wonder if Hyundai has taken it a bit too far, and therefore I wonder if they might be able to wind this back a bit with a software update in future, because as it is, it's really incessantly annoying. And that simplistic answer of, well, if you don't want to be annoyed, just don't speed, doesn't really make sense when the reliability of the traffic sign recognition could be a lot better. So, good performance, decent handling, supple ride quality, excellent range, and ridiculously fast highway recharging, the best we've ever seen on our Chasing Cars test. Well, I think you'd say the base model Hyundai Ioniq 6 dynamic rear-wheel drive is shaping up as a pretty decent buy in the fully electric segment. Not sponsored, not paid for by Hyundai, entirely independent. We reward good cars. That is a very good car, EV or not. And personally, I think the price is pretty fair. It'd be nice to see maybe an even more stripped out model with cloth seats for under 70 grand. That kind of price point would be really sharp for an Ioniq 6. But as it sits with plenty of premium features, I think this variant does stack up. And now it's over to you. What do you think of this car? Would you consider buying one? Have you purchased something else instead? Let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.